everyone. My name is Wanda Kay, and I'm excited to be with you today as we go into chapter 4 of The Greatest Miracle in the World, written by Mandino. Thank you for being here with me, and I hope that you will continue to be here with me as we go through the remaining chapters of the book as well. And there will be a link to follow and look at the previous chapters if you're just now tuning in. Chapter 4. A month passed before I saw him again. It was well past closing time, and I was alone in my office, trying to make some dent in the correspondence that had accumulated during my absence. I heard the outer office door click and stiffened. Whoever had been last out had neglected to lock up, and robberies were becoming a way of life in that neighborhood. Then Lazarus appeared in my office doorway in a flurry of uncoordinated movements, tail wagging, ears rising and falling, sad eyes, tongue flashing, and pulling on the rope which led back to his master. The old man hugged me. "Mr. Ogg, it is good to see you. Lazarus and I, we were both worried about you." "I've been away on book business, Simon. I think someone is trying to change my life." "For better?" "I'm not sure. Maybe you'll be able to tell me." "I knew you weren't here, Mr. Ogg. Each day I would look out my window for your little brown car. No car. No Mr. Ogg. And then this morning, there it was. I was so happy. I wanted to see you, and yet I didn't want to bother you. It took all day to get up the courage to come here." "I'm glad you did. I would have come over to see you anyway, to tell you the news about the book." "Good news?" "I'm still not sure it's happening to me." The old man nodded and patted my shoulder proudly. Then he led Lazarus to my coat rack and tied a loose knot around its base with the rope. The dog buried his nose in the heavy carpet and closed his eyes. "You look great, Simon. I've never seen you in a suit and tie before." My visitor shyly rubbed his fingers on his wrinkled jacket lapel and shrugged. "I could not come visit a company president looking like a bum, could I?" "Why not? I imagine you rag pickers work in all sorts of disguises and have probably infiltrated more walks of life than the CIA angels without portfolio." The beginning of a smile evaporated suddenly when I said angels. Then he collected himself and forced a wry grin. Only a writer would coin such a poignant description. Still, we rag pickers are very short-handed. There is also a population explosion on humanity's junk piles, and not enough of us to do the job properly. I wonder if your magazine's publisher, W. Clement Stone, is a rag picker. We both turned our heads toward a portrait of my boss, staring warmly at me from the panel wall on the right side of my desk. "I think he must be, Simon. He picked me off of the junk pile 16 years ago when I was broke, alone, and taking frequent drives into the bottle. Funny, but you rag pickers also seem to have a policy of secrecy about your good deeds. Since I'm so close to him, I happen to know about some of the people that Mr. Stone has helped, and yet very few of his Good Samaritan activities ever get into the papers." Simon nodded. "That is because we rag pickers all try to follow the biblical command, which Lloyd Douglas popularized in his book, Magnificent Obsession." "You mean to do good and shut up?" His booming laugh filled my office. "That's what I mean, although I've never heard it put exactly that way. I think I still prefer the original injunction from Jesus as Matthew wrote it." "Simon, did you know that when the book Magnificent Obsession was published, Bible sales skyrocketed throughout the world?" "Why was that, Mr. Ogg?" "Because everyone began to search for the biblical passage that formed the theme of the book, and Douglas, with a stroke of genius, never specifically pointed it out in the book. Looking for that passage almost became the most popular pastime in this country for a year or more and made Magnificent Obsession a bestseller. And those who found the injunction would keep the specific gospel chapter and verse to themselves as if it were a privileged secret that one could only become a part of through one's own discovery. We could use that sort of game today, Mr. Ogg. Yes, we could. Do you know the passage, Simon? The old man smiled, rose to his full height, faced me across my desk, cupped his right hand so that only his index finger was pointed toward me, and proceeded to send shivers through me. Take heed that you do not your alms before men, to be seen of them. Otherwise ye have no reward of your Father which is in heaven. Therefore, when thou dost thine alms, do not sound a trumpet before thee, as the hypocrites do, in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may have glory of men. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. But when thou doest alms, let not thy left hand know what thy right hand doeth, that thine alms may be in secret. And thy Father which seeth in secret himself shall reward thee openly. I'm positive that it was never delivered better, except on that mountain 2,000 years ago. I poured my friend a cup of terrible coffee, and we made small talk as he strolled, cup in hand, slowly around my office. He paused at the wall studded with autographed photographs and read the names aloud, his voice rising gradually in pitch with each additional name, as if to signify that he was impressed. The old fox was teasing me, and I loved it. Rudy Valley, Art Linkletter, John F. Kennedy, Charles Percy, Harlan Sanders, Joey Bishop, Senator Harold Hughes, Frank Gifford, James Stewart, Robert Cummings, Robert Redford, Barbara Streisand, Ben Hogan, Norman Vincent Peale. These are your friends? Some are, and the others thought they'd show their gratitude for an article we did on them at one time or another. I like James Stewart. All his movies, good movies. You know him? I knew him many years ago. I was a bombardier in his B-24 group in World War II. He was brave. Very brave. He completed his combat tour long before there was much fighter escort to protect our bombers, and he could outdrink all of us. Good, good. Simon continued his casual inventory of my office, probably comparing it to his long-ago presidential trappings in Damascus. A faint smell of camphor seeped from his severely cut pinstripe suit, and yet he wore it with a dignity and style that made it easy to picture him behind a large mahogany desk, dispensing advice when necessary, and also giving trouble to someone when they deserved it. Finally, he put his coffee cup down and said, I can wait no longer. Tell me of your good news, Mr. Ogg. You brought me good luck, Simon. I'm sure of it. There must be a lot of leprechaun beneath that rag-picker facade of yours. Remember that last night at your place when we discovered all those amazing coincidences between my book, Hero, and you? How could I ever forget? Well, when I got home, there was a message to call my publisher, Frederick Fell. He told me that a large paperback house wanted to meet him, his vice president, Charles Nuremberg, and myself on Monday to discuss their possible purchase of the reprint rights of the book. So that Sunday night, I was on my way to New York. Were you nervous, worried? Not very much, at least not that night. But the next morning in New York, I was up at 6, and I smoked a lot and drank a ton of coffee, waiting for our 1 o'clock meeting. Even so, I arrived at the publisher's building on 5th Avenue an hour early. So I did something I haven't done for a long time. Right next door was a church. I don't even remember its name, but it was open and I went in. What did you do? I prayed. I actually walked up to the altar, knelt at the rail and prayed. How did you pray? The only way I know. I didn't ask for anything, just that God would give me the guidance and courage to handle whatever came up. Funny, Simon, I could almost hear a voice asking, where have you been, Ogg? Then, before I knew what was happening, I was bawling, and I couldn't stop. Luckily, no one was around, but I felt like a silly fool anyway. Why were you crying? Do you know? I guess being in that church reminded me of all the Sundays I had gone to church with my mother when I was young. My world almost stopped when she died of a heart attack right after I graduated from high school. She was something special and had me convinced that I was going to be a writer. Or even when I was in grade school, I still remember how she would review my compositions or the other written work I brought home, and we had such a great relationship that she could criticize my work constructively, and I'd always accept it and resolve to try harder. She was so proud when I became news editor of our high school paper. You'd have thought I'd been tapped by the New York Times. She wanted me to go to college, but we were having a tough time just surviving in 1940. Then she died, and I joined the Army Air Force. You never attended college, Mr. Ogg? No. The old man looked around my office again and shook his head. Amazing. What else took place in that church? Nothing else. I finally got control of myself, and by then it was nearly time for our appointment, so I left the church, walked across the street and into the publisher's lobby. When I got off the elevator on the 26th floor, I found myself walking down this long hall flanked by giant posters of some of the most famous writers in the world, published by this firm. All I could think was, Mom, we made it. We're here with the best. And your meeting with the publishing executives? It went sensationally. Large boardroom table, large room, many names, many faces. As we were told later, they had already decided to purchase the paperback rights. What they wanted to learn was whether I was marketable and promotable along with the book. Balzac, Dickens, Tolstoy, they would have failed that test. You're probably right. Anyway, I spoke to them for about 10 minutes, told them how the book came to be written, and I guess I made the proper impression. The old man was now vicariously reliving every minute of my command performance. He leaned forward excitedly and pointed both hands at me, motioning me to continue. Finally, their chairman of the board looked at my publisher, Fred Fell, and asked what we wanted for the paperback rights. Mr. Fell, in his best poker-playing voice, replied that he wanted $1 for every hardcover copy we had sold, and we had, at that point, sold 350,000 copies. There was a little gasping sound and groaning around the table, and the chairman said that he hadn't expected to go that high. Then he excused himself, beckoned to one of his vice presidents, and left the room. I guess they were only gone for a few minutes, Simon, but so help me, it seemed like a year. And when they came back, the chairman went over to Mr. Fell, put his hand out, and they shook. That was it. It was that simple. Yes. They are paying you $350,000? Yes. Mr. Ogg, you're wealthy. Not as wealthy as you think. Mr. Fell gets half of that, and then we both must share with Uncle Sam. But, Mr. Ogg, you already earned a considerable sum of money in royalties from all those hardcover sales, have you not? Yes. Did you know that F. Scott Fitzgerald, 3 years after The Great Gatsby was published, received only $5.15 in royalties, and by the time he died, that marvelous book was already out of print? No, I didn't know that, Simon. And don't misunderstand. I'm not ungrateful. I can't believe it's happened to me yet. Maybe it was that prayer in the church. And maybe it was your mother's prayers, my friend. Now, where have you been for the rest of the month? Well, since the paperback won't be out until next spring, Fell decided to promote the hardcover book heavily through the summer and fall. So I agreed to go on a radio, television, and newspaper promotional tour for 3 weeks. I've been in 14 cities, been interviewed more than 90 times, and I'm getting to like it. even the bookstore autographing sessions. I'm so very proud and happy for you, Mr. Ogg. We sat for a while, two comrades sharing a victory. There was more small talk before I finally got up enough courage to ask, Simon, did you ever get around to reading my book? Of course, the very same night you left it with me. It is a beautiful thing. The paperback people will sell millions of copies, and the world needs your book, Mr. Ogg. That was good enough for me. They could have all the other rave book reviews I had been saving. Simon rose and said, Come, we must celebrate. One sherry for your good fortune. I went. After we were seated in our usual chairs, Simon had poured. He resumed our office conversation. Mr. Ogg, the haunting similarities between your great salesman and my own life have caused me many sleepless nights. And the probable odds, after all the other coincidences, that Hafid's wife and mine would both be named Alicia must be beyond the ability of any computer to calculate. I've tried to put it out of my mind, Simon. I think the extrasensory perception people call that sort of thing precognition, or maybe not. I did write the book before I knew about you, but you lived those events before I wrote the book. I don't know what they'd call that, but it's still very scary to think about. Do you believe it's all just coincidence? Chance? The old man sighed, shook his head. Coleridge wrote that chance is but the pseudonym of God for those particular cases which he chooses not to subscribe openly with his own signature. I like that. And if it is one of God's secrets, there isn't much we can do about it. So I'm not going to dwell on it. I haven't even discussed it with anyone else. Who'd believe me? It's fortunate we have each other, Mr. Ogg. We sipped our sherry in a peaceful stillness that can only be experienced by two people who truly relate to each other. A quiet that neither felt necessary to disturb with words, merely to reinforce friendship. I didn't know what Simon was thinking, but I was trying to muster up enough courage to spring a suggestion on him, one that had occurred to me while flying back from my New York meeting with the paperback publishers. One thing I had learned in New York was that good self-help and inspiring writing material was at a premium. Whether it was the state or the nation or just another publishing cycle, every publishing house, it seemed, was on the lookout for another Wake Up and Live, or The Power of Positive Thinking, or How to Win Friends and Influence People. Whenever our country gets down on itself, it seems that self-help books rise to the top of the sales charts, and most publishers, trying to anticipate the future, were apparently figuring the country was in for another down. I thought Simon would be a natural. I took the plunge. Simon, how many people do you figure you've helped turn their lives around in your role as a rag picker? There was no hesitation. In the past 13 years, 100. Exactly? Yes. How do you know? Have you kept a diary of some sort? No. When I first began this adventure, my intentions were good, but my methods of trying to help were trial and error, mostly error, I'm afraid. I did more harm than good in those early cases, I discovered, for I brought them partly out of their living death and then through my ignorance let them fall back. You see, I was trying to deal with each in a different way, consistent with the individual personality involved. Only gradually did I come to realize that while we are all different, each unique in his or her own way, our lack of self-esteem, which produced our failure, is a universal sickness, always originating from the complex of either anxiety, guilt, or inferiority. In the 3 standard emotional problems recognized by most students of psychiatry, not being learned in this area, I had to be taught the hard way in the gutters and junk piles, and then from my books. And when you found this common denominator, did you do something to standardize your system of assistance? Yes. Man has been trying to solve the challenge of his elusive self-esteem since we first were walked upright, and wise men have been writing of the disease and its cure for thousands of years, each giving us similar solutions, which of course we continue to ignore. When this truth became clear to me, I spent several months in this apartment with my books, extracting and distilling the true secrets of success and happiness into words that were as simple as the truths they proclaimed. So simple that most individuals searching for answers to their problems scarcely would recognize them, much less pay the price to follow such unexotic rules for happy and meaningful life. How many rules were there? Only 4. And after months of labor and a mountain of notes, the few pages which contained the essence of all the simple secrets of success seemed hardly worthy of all the research I had done. Then I reminded myself that it took many tons of rock to produce an ounce of gold. Subsequently, I took my findings out into the world and used them in my own manner, and they've never failed. You have this material in writing now? When I had completed my work in longhand, I brought it to a small printing establishment on Broadway. They typed it in the format that I requested, and I used that master copy to reproduce 100 sets. Then I numbered each copy, 1 to 100. How did you distribute the material? You didn't just hand the thing to every downtrodden soul you met. Oh, no. Man usually does not throw himself on the junk pile until after the realization comes to him that no one in the world truly cares about him. When I find someone who needs help, I first try to convince him or her that there are still 2 pure persons who care, God and me, one in heaven and one on earth. Then what? Once I've convinced them that we truly care and wish to help, once I know they have confidence in me, I tell them that I'm going to give them a very special document, which contains a message from God. I tell them that all I want from them is 20 minutes of their time each day to read their message from God just before they go to sleep, and this is to continue for 100 consecutive evenings. In exchange for these few daily minutes, a small price to pay, especially for people where time no longer has much value, they will learn how to pick themselves off the junk pile and perform the greatest miracle in the world. They will resurrect themselves from living deaths, literally, and eventually achieve all the true riches of life that they dreamed about. In other words, the message from God, absorbed day by day into their deep subconscious mind that never sleeps, enables them to become their own rag picker, self-help at its best. A message from God, doesn't that terrify them? Especially since you already look and sound as most of us picture God, your beard, your figure, your manner, your height, your voice. Mr. Ogg, you are already forgetting one fact. I pull these people from their own living deaths. They've already deserted this life in their minds. They are positive that they can do nothing to help themselves, and they are willing to grasp at any hand that reaches out to them. It's a hand of hope. Hope? Yes. Do you know that story about the famous perfume manufacturer who at his retirement dinner was asked to explain his secret of success? He reminded his audience that his success had not come because of the fine fragrances or packaging or merchandising methods he had used so brilliantly. He had succeeded because he was the only perfume manufacturer who realized that he was selling to women was not some exotic odor or glamour or even sexual magnetism. What he was selling them was hope. That's wonderful. Now, back to this message from God. Actually, Mr. Ogg, when I hand the document to them, they see that it is not just a message. It is a memorandum from God. I had the document typed and printed in the format of a general office memorandum. I started to laugh. A memorandum from God. Simon, why not? Long ago, God communicated with us by chiseling 10 commandments onto tablets, which he delivered to Moses on Mount Sinai. Later, he wrote a warning on the wall of King Belshazzar's tell us how he would communicate with us today if he decided to do it in writing. What is the most modern form of written communication? Memorandums? Exactly. They are concise. They have a universal form. They're practical and can be found in nearly every country in the world. Our nation runs on memorandums, or perhaps despite them. How many workers begin each day with instructions they receive in the form of memorandums from their supervisors? Memorandums tacked on bulletin boards, taped to punch presses at the end of assembly lines throughout the armed forces, and passing from desk to desk in millions of offices. A memorandum is most relative to this generation. And so what more effective format in this hurried world could one give to those who need help than 4 secrets of happiness and success, compressed into brief memorandum from God? His disclosure shook me up so much that I had almost forgotten my reason for bringing the whole thing up. Half to myself, I muttered, "A memorandum from God?" Simon heard me and pointed toward his stacks of books. "Why not? You've heard me expound enough times on my theories that God was involved in the writing of so many books. I merely distilled their essence, eliminated the middlemen, and written a conscientious message. Excuse me, let me start that sentence again. I've merely distilled their essence, eliminated the middlemen, and written a consensus message directly from God." Dear friend, I'm certainly no expert on such matters, but wouldn't many people call that sort of thing blasphemy? The old man shook his head in that patronizing way one does when dealing with a child who's obviously having great difficulty trying to grasp what seems so simple to the adult. Why is it blasphemy? Blasphemy involves dealing with matters of God in a mocking or profane way. What I have done has been consummated with love and respect and with no thought of personal gain. And it works. How does it work, Simon? You're not telling me that merely reading a 20-minute memorandum from God or anyone else that one can change one's life for the better. Can reading anything have that much influence on one for either good or bad? I remember recently reading some crime commission report where one of the members had said that there was no direct traceable relationship between pornography and crime, and that so far as he knew, no one had ever yet gotten pregnant or diseased by reading a dirty book. Mr. Ogg, the individual who made that remark must be very stupid and unworldly person. Remember that I told you about the thoughts that a man thinks and how they affect his actions and his life. I agree that reading any 20-minute message by itself once will do little good, but reading that same message each night before you go to sleep opens many hidden passages in your mind. And throughout the night, those ideas seep into all levels of your being. Next day, when you awake unconsciously, you begin to react almost imperceptibly at first to the message you imprinted on your brain the previous evening. Slowly, day by day, you change as the message transforms itself from words and ideas into action and reaction on your part. It cannot fail, providing you read and imprint it each night. But Simon, we've had the 10 Commandments for several thousand years, and look at the mess this world is in. Mr. Ogg, do not blame the commandments. How many read them? How many know them? Can you, for example, recite all 10? I shook my head, and by this time had almost abandoned my original idea that had triggered this conversation. Still, I probed for an opening. Simon, you mentioned that you have helped 100 people. You also said that when you printed the God Memorandum, you ordered 100 copies and numbered them. Does that mean that you are now out of copies? Yes, except for the master copy from which the others were reproduced. Are you going to have more printed? Mr. Ogg, I am old, and my days are numbered on this earth, and as I have already told you, rag pickers are in short supply. It is time that I make the supreme effort to multiply myself so that my work will continue after I'm no longer here. How, Simon? I would like you to consider a proposition. I would like to see that the master copy of the God Memorandum fulfills what must be its certain fate, its preordained destiny. How? At the end of your book, you have the greatest salesman in the world, now an old man like me, pass on his 10 scrolls of success to a very special person. Would it not be fitting if, after all the other mysterious coincidences between your book's hero and myself, we have one more, the ultimate coincidence? I'm sorry, I don't follow you, Simon. If you were willing, if you would accept, I would like to pass the master copy of the God Memorandum on to a very special person, you. If it pleases you, if you become convinced that it can help others, as I assure you it can, you have my permission to include it in one of your future books if you wish, and then it will go out into the world and benefit thousands, perhaps millions, with your following. How better could one old rag picker ever hope to multiply himself than that? Had he read my mind? Or was it just another impossible coincidence that he should offer his writings to me on this day of all days when I'd been planning to ask about them? I don't know what to say, Simon. I'm honored that you would even consider me to be your instrument of transmittal. You would be perfect, but make no hasty decision on this. Sleep on my offer for many nights. There is yet time, and of course, if you accept the God Memorandum, I must ask a small payment for my work, as would any self-respecting author. Payment? Okay. No, you do not understand. I'm not talking of money. If the God Memorandum passes to you, it is necessary first that you promise me that you will use it personally, as I have instructed, before you present it to the world. You are a wonderful and sensitive person, Mr. Ogg. Yet there is a look in your eyes that tells me you've not found peace or contentment or fulfillment, even with all your success. The world praises you, yet you do not praise yourself. There is that familiar, to me, sense of quiet desperation in your demeanor. Something is undone in you, and sooner or later I am fearful that you will explode unless you reshape your world. If you explode, they will toss you on the junk pile, and this old rag picker will not be around to save you. That must not happen. An ounce of prevention is still worth a pound of cure, so when you receive the God Memorandum, you must agree that you will first employ it to strengthen and guide you in your own quest for happiness and peace of mind. Then, and only then, are you to pass it on to others who are ready, to those who have eyes to see and ears to hear, and the desire to help themselves. All right, Simon. Mr. Ogg, you have great potential. You are a rare talent. You must not be wasted. I shall see that you are not. Simon, your words make me feel humble, very small. You are far from small, dear friend. Look where I've placed your book. I turned my head and followed the direction of his open hand toward the tallest pile of Hand of God books in his living room. And there, on top of the pile, was mine. That concludes chapter 4 of the book by Og Mandino, The Greatest Miracle in the World. I hope you'll be with me again in our next video as we go over chapter 5. Take care, and I'll look forward to talking with you again soon.